We have, I think at this point, 4 of the 10 largest school districts in the country, about a quarter of all the schools for the blind. And I think of the largest 300 districts in the country, about 35 or 40 of them are using the ObjectiveEd software with their visually impaired students.
Please welcome, from ObjectiveEd, Marty Shultz.
We're going to come out with a product in September called a Sonic Math Fundamentals, where through both a combination of tactile and sonified feedback, we'll help the youngest kids learn and practice all these basic math concepts like shapes and number lines and end lines, and eventually graphs and charts.
Developing interactive games and software to help teachers teach and for students to learn.
Visit us at www.objectiveed.com.
And now here's Marty Shultz from ObjectiveEd. Hope you enjoy.
Like anything else, you keep failing until you're successful.
Welcome to Blind Abilities. I'm Jeff Thompson. Today in the studio, we have Marty Shultz, and he is a founder of ObjectiveEd, a software development company that researches and develops game-playing, learning, educational tools. Marty, thank you so much for coming on to Blind Abilities.
Thanks. I'm actually just one of 3 founders. My 2 partners, Bob and Luke, are also very instrumental in growing the company. And we've since added a bunch more people since we started the company back in 2018. ObjectiveEd really started out of the work I had done on blindfold games. A lot of your listeners might be familiar with this. It started out with Blindfold Racer, which was the very first game we ended up building. And then over the course of about 4 years, I was popping out about a game a month. And the last time I looked a few months ago, I think all the games in total had been downloaded over 500,000 times. And Blindfold Racer had been downloaded at least, I think, 75,000 times. So 75 unique iTunes accounts.
Wow. Marty, what led you to be part of the development of ObjectiveEd?
Well, back in 2018, I was here, or 2017, I was starting to hear from a lot of teachers that said, we're making all these fun games. Can we do something for the younger kids? Because they're starting to use some of our games to teach different concepts for the younger kids, like Blindfold Bowling was both fine motor control and cause and effect, and Blindfold Battleship was teaching grids, and Blindfold Barnyard was teaching directionality. And they said, couldn't you kind of focus on just skills for the youngest kids? So I did some market research there. I met with people from APH, people from Perkins, people from the Carroll Center, people from the American Foundation for the Blind, people from the American Council for the Blind, kind of a lot of the lighthouses. And I said, if we started a company that built skill building games for kids who are visually impaired, was it something that they would find valuable? And I heard from all of them that was a good idea. So we ended up raising some private money to launch ObjectiveEd, and we launched it that summer. And then we spent the next year and a half building out a set of games. And then just when we were ready to start piloting them, COVID hit. Now, fortunately, the concept behind ObjectiveEd is that these games reinforce the skills that the teachers teach the kids. So whether it's a directionality game or some sort of assistive technology game or a wayfinding game or a Braille-oriented game, whatever it is, the teacher plays the game with the younger student, and then the student can practice on their own. Well, that fit very well into the concept of remote or distance learning that everybody was subject to for the year and a half that COVID was really impacting kids in school. So we had a lot of school districts sign up to use the system. We gave it away for free in the spring semester of 2020, and then a lot of the school districts came back and actually subscribed to it starting in the fall of 2020, and many of them have stayed around since COVID is really starting to wane, and realized that this is great tools for kids to reinforce a lot of the skills that they work with their teachers to get over some of the pandemic learning loss that occurred over the past 2 years. So we have, I think at this point, 4 of the 10 largest school districts in the country, about a quarter of all the schools for the blind. And I think of the largest 300 districts in the country, about 35 or 40 of them are using the ObjectiveEd software with their visually impaired students.
Is the ObjectiveEd software, is that like one particular game, or are you buying into the entire package?
We provide one system from which then the teacher will pick what games and what game levels each of his or her students will be using. So it's one annual fee is how the school district will get it, and then the teachers pick and choose the game. So let's say we're looking at a game like Temple Explore, which just came out about a year or so ago. Temple Explore is designed for kids in middle school and high school to build up multi-step directions, advanced directionality, where you're on a quest within an ancient temple and you have to follow the directions of the genie. And then depending on what levels you're at, that game would act differently. And a lot of the games are scaffolded on each other. So if you look at kind of our games, they start with Barnyard, which is very simple directionality, over to Temple Explorer, which is more advanced versions of that, over to a game called Wayfinder, where you're exploring a medieval town and following directions and learning how to use a fake GPS aspect of your phone and learning and really mastering mental maps, all the way up to something called Map Explorer, where you enter either an intersection or a zip code or something like that. And then it actually pulls down a Google map and adds information to it so you can build out a whole mental map of your neighborhood and plan out routes. So how you get to your local Walgreens, or how do you get to a campus that you're heading at. We have a wide variety of things for orientation mobility, a wide variety of things for assistive technology. We also have a couple of innovations that we've done along the lines of Braille literacy. We started with putting a sheet of Braille on an iPad, and the iPad knows what's on that sheet of Braille. So as you read the Braille sheet that's resting on the iPad, we know where your fingers are touching and what you're reading. So we have a set of games, whether you're starting with something like APH's building on patterns, and you simply have to look for, and this is very early Braille literacy, you're simply looking for a pattern or the use of certain words. You kind of read the story and then find the word where that word or words where you have that pattern, and simply double tap that word on the screen. And that gets more and more complex, where we have about 5 or 6 games all built around a sheet of Braille on an iPad, where it might be giving teachers the ability to create a science test that they can hand out to 5 or 6 kids, or a personalized story where they have to answer questions in that story by improving their comprehension and their Braille at the same time. From there, we moved over to something called Braille AI Tutor, where we're actually using speech recognition. In that game, the teacher types a story into a web dashboard, and then the system will send one sentence at a time to the student's Braille display. The student must read the sentence that the Braille display pops up, and they read it out loud. And then we verify that what the student has read matched the sentence from the story that was assigned. And if the student read it correctly, they move ahead in a treasure hunting game. So across those areas of wayfinding, Braille technology, and assistive Braille literacy and assistive technology, we have probably about 24 or so different games at different levels. Now, most recently, because you mentioned a number of your listeners are transition age, we won a grant from the National Institute of Disability and Rehabilitation Research. And in that game, we built a 5-chapter story that lets a high school student play an interactive fiction game to go through all the steps necessary to find a summer job, interview for that job, and then perform their first day on the job. We kind of finished this up about 6 or 8 months ago, and now a lot of different agencies and schools are using what we're calling summer job story or transition adventure to practice these independent living skills and problem-solving skills and self-advocacy skills that is needed to really get a job and succeed in that job.
Well, that's great because, in vocational rehab, and it's the goal of all the schools to help them improve, and gainful employment is the goal behind all this stuff. So that's really great that you're focusing on those areas. I like how you're community driven. You're going to the places and asking what they want. You're collaborating with them and then producing a product for them.
The cool part about Transition Adventure was we were able to assemble a team, because we had the NIDLA funding to do this, of 2 very successful blind adults, Kim Charlson, who used to be president of the ACB, and Brian Charlson, her husband, who used to be director of IT at the Carroll Center, along with a researcher from the National Research and Training Center for Blind and Low Vision at Mississippi State University, and then a vision rehabilitation therapist from the Carroll Center, and 2 interactive fiction writers. And then over the course of 6 months, we were able to build this out. Now, once we finished that, we went back and we've been applying for several more grants to build out more technology, more interactive fiction stories to deal with other parts of transition. So we have a couple of grants going to NIH for specifically job interview skills and job search skills. We have a couple going to NIH and to NIDLA for building up college readiness transition. So a lot of kids go through high school and have a lot of help along the way. When they're ready to go to college, they find that it's a lot harder than expected, and their expectations are different from what they thought. And should we get the funding to build out this new game, I think it'll really help kids in the transition to college too.
Tell me a little bit about skills fade.
Sure. So what we noticed for both kids with disabilities, kids with blindness or low vision, and kids in just general education is all the problems that happen and the lack of regular schooling over the past 18 months caused most kids to lose about 4 months worth of skills, whether these skills are simply skills in math or English or skills in navigation and wayfinding or use of assistive technology. There were some studies by, I think, McKinsey that said the average student lost about 4 months worth of skills and learning over the COVID period of 18 months. We did some research there and found out that any time a skill is not properly exercised, you're going to lose it. There was even a study that was done with paramedics, and they found that unless the paramedics regularly practice CPR, most of them, after 6 months from their training, most of them had lost their ability to do it properly. So it really doesn't matter what you're learning. If you don't exercise a skill, you're going to lose it. And a lot of the cool parts about ObjectiveEd's gamified skill building curriculum is that you can practice these skills on these games, and it eliminates a lot of the skill fade, so that way you get back to your old levels of competency and then can move ahead.
Well, that's great. A lot of people have that right after the summer vacation and they go back to school and they got to relearn what they had learned before.
Definitely. The other thing I wanted to just touch on is we were also awarded a grant from NIH to address the problem that very young kids have a problem in really mastering math because a lot of math concepts are visual. So using that same concept I mentioned earlier where we take a sheet of Braille and put it on an iPad, we propose to them teaching concepts like following lines and understanding shapes and understanding the number line through both a tactile paper that sits on an iPad as well as through sonification. And we're just in the process of wrapping up that grant product, and we're going to come out with a product in September called a Sonic Math Fundamentals, where through both a combination of tactile and sonified feedback, will help the youngest kids learn and practice all these basic math concepts like shapes and number lines and lines, and eventually graphs and charts and concepts like that. And then we'll do a follow-up grant with NIH to really build out a full curriculum for kids between kindergarten and 5th grade.
Oh, that's really good because spatial can sometimes just be a concept and not really attained in the minds of some people.
And if we can help them learn in a multimodal fashion through tactile, through sound, and through the actual instructions, and then they can transfer these skills so that by the time they're in high school, when they have to learn way more complex concepts and use tools that are all based around sonification for people who are visually impaired, they'll have already gotten past that learning curve and they can use the tools as effectively as their sighted peers.
So, Marty, when ObjectiveEd is going to conventions and conferences, who is your target?
Our target right now are both school districts, the kind of the special ed department of school districts where the TBIs and the O&Ms work, as well as agencies like lighthouses and other, or schools for the blind. We have a lot of agencies who are customers of ours who use our curriculum to work with kids after school. We have dozens and dozens of school districts using the system.
And how can they find ObjectiveEd?
They can visit us at www.objectiveed.com. Make sure you get the double E from objective, the E at the end, and then ed.com. And the website should be fully accessible, and there's lots of information on there, including some of our newer products that are coming out for people who have dyslexia.
That's awesome. Did you imagine this growing? Like when you first came out with Blindfold Racer, did you imagine where you'd be today and helping the blindness community, the students, learn like this?
With Blindfold Racer, it was really just kind of living each day in the present, and I was having fun building the games, and I was just getting such great positive feedback from the community. That's why I kept producing more and more of the games. Once we decided to build ObjectiveEd back in 2018, we knew what effect we would have, and we knew how to do this properly. This is not the first software company that myself and my partners have built, so we knew what we had to accomplish, and we just set out to do it, and we're doing it.
Well, I want to thank you for what you're doing because I've been getting the emails and reading your newsletters and everything like that. And it just seems with those grants you've been getting that it's starting to really take off.
It's not easy to get the grants, and it's like anything else. You keep failing until you're successful.
Well, keep being successful, Marty, and thank you for coming on the Blind Abilities.
Well, thank you for inviting us.
Once again, that's ObjectiveEd.com. Always a great time having Marty Shultz from ObjectiveEd on the show. Be sure to check out the show notes and click on the links. Find out more about ObjectiveEd and what they're doing for you. For more podcasts with the blindness perspective, check us out on the web at www.blindabilities.com, on Twitter at blindabilities, and download the free Blind Abilities app from the App Store and Google Play Store. That's 2 words, Blind Abilities. And if you want to leave some feedback, give us some suggestions, give us a call at 612-367-6093. We'd love to hear from you. A big shout out to Chi Chow for his beautiful music. You can follow Chi Chow on Twitter at LChichow. And from all of us here at Blind Abilities, through these challenging times, stay well, stay informed, and stay strong. I want to thank you for listening, and until next time, bye-bye.
When we share
what we see
through each other's eyes, we can then begin to bridge the gap between
the limited expectations
and the
reality of blind ability.
The realities of blind abilities.